What's up, fam? I want to touch on a certain topic that pretty much has always kind of like been in the in the back of my mind. But first of all, I want to ask you a question. What is the first thing that comes in mind when you mention California? Well, most people think in the music industry. Um, Most people think of the entertainment industry in general, um, the movie industry, um, weather, good weather, palm trees, beaches, but they never talk about the dark side of California, and that is the anti black racism that goes on in California. And the overwhelmingly homeless rate in California, where almost half of the homeless people, almost half of the almost half the homeless rate in California are 30% black Americans, when we only make up 8% of the population in California. So there's definitely some racial disparities, definitely some racism there. And it's crazy because no one wants to talk about this. None of these so-called black leaders out here in California wants to mention that. You know, they too busy running around talking about the black and brown coalition, which never existed and never will exist because there's racism from them also. But when most people think of racism, they don't think of California. They think of southern states. And I understand there's racism down there as well. But they never mention the anti black racism in California that specifically comes from Hispanics, white liberals, and Asians, and others. See, down south, you only have to deal with the white racism. But on the West Coast, man, you get hit from every direction. And black people are dealing with housing discrimination out on the West Coast. Uh, Gentrification. It goes on and on and on. But I want you to peep this article out. Black people make up 8% of LA population and 34% of its homeless. That is unacceptable, which I totally agree. But what's going to be done about it? That's the $1 million question. In Los Angeles, County, African American represents 7.9% of the population. And the latest homeless count with double digit city and county increases that are uniformly disappointing and disturbing. Black people make up 34% of the 66 plus total. Okay. As as it as has been true in other recent years, that is out of whack by 4 times, and is a particularly important number to highlight today as a reinvigorated national conversation on racial disparities is taking place across the United States. Without institutional racism, there would be 15,000 fewer people experiencing homelessness. Absolutely right. I mean, come on now, man. Black people make up 8% of the population in California, but 30% of the homeless rate is made up of black Americans. Absolutely, there are some racial disparities there. Institutional racism, which, by the way, a lot of white people want to say don't exist. Even some ignorant black people, but I won't even get into even naming the names. Experiencing homelessness almost all coming from black and Native American populations, said the sum the summation of county statistics released this week by the Los Angeles Homeless Service Authority. All right. That's crazy. Crazy, crazy, crazy. On Friday, I toured Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles, which I first became familiar with 15 years ago after befriending a homeless African American musician. I vividly recalled how police back then routinely issued tickets for things such as jaywalking to people who suffer from severe mental illness. My friend was a target more than once. The area is still an outdoor museum of social and economic failure, with its stark results on full display. Tents and blue tarps are still everywhere. People sleep on clogged sidewalks, and the vast majority of homeless people on Skid Row, I say 75% or more, are black. That's a goddamn shame, man. California ought to be ashamed of itself and have the audacity to talk down on southern states when black people in southern states are doing better than black people in California. Straight facts. Black people down south are doing much better economically than black people in California, but yet California tries to turn its nose up at southern states. The nerve, man. The nerve. Highest homeless rate, highest highest poor people rate. What do you call it? What's the word? Um, Poverty rate. California has the highest poverty rate. Black people make up the majority of that. But yet, they love to point their fingers. Love to point their finger at the South. Oh, the South is this, the South is racist, anti-black. Nah, I believe California is more anti-black than any southern state. And that's why a lot of black people are getting the hell up out of California for that exact reason. But be on the lookout, because now you have these crazy ass liberals trying to move to where black people are and take over that. Atlanta is an example. They're trying to take over South Carolina. I can go on and on, man. These people are beyond wicked, man. Beyond. You can find homeless black people in any part of LA County these days, but why is such a concentration on Skid Row? That's a good question. For one thing, a county health official told me many neighborhoods don't have as much supportive housing, addiction rehabilitation, and mental health resources as Skid Row does, due partly to organized neighborhood opposition throughout LA. Through the decades, if you're destitute, sick, hungry, traumatized, Skid Row is where you go. And for decades, black Angelenos have disproportionately grappled with all of those things. In LA County, racial disparities abound. Black people are twice as likely to die of COVID 19 as white people. I don't believe that. You know, I've seen a lot of white people get taken out by COVID. You know, real talk. But that's a topic for another for another time. But that's propaganda, folks. Propaganda. More white people have died from COVID than black people. You know, more white people have taken the shots and have died more so than black people. Um, Black nations are the least affected by COVID. But come on. I mean, we already know people who are woke and the third eye open know what time it is. So, like I said, I'm digressing. That's a topic for another time. Let's get back to this. In Los Angeles Unified, the second largest school district in the country, about 90% of those who attend district schools are students of color. How about black people? They love to lump everybody else with us. And 80% of ALAUSD students fall below the poverty line. A Times study published a few days ago determined that of the nearly 900 people killed by police in LA County since 2000, 80% were people of color, which I believe are black people. But you know, that's how these liberals are. They love to throw that word people of color so they can try to, you know, kind of lower the flames or whatever. As I wrote on the first day of major demonstrations in Los Angeles for all the wealth in the state that ranks as the fifth largest economy of the world, schools are not equal. Access to health care is not equal. Criminal justice is not equal, and neither is access to good jobs with decent pay. You have all these institutional things that over decades and decades broke down the black family, said former state Senator Kevin Murray, who was a member of the Legislative Black Caucus and now directs the Wingard Homeless Service Agency in the heart of Skid Row. What followed was mass incarceration and its aftermath. When those incarcerated people were let out, Murray said, sometimes after a relatively minor offense, they had nowhere to go and barriers kept them from gainful employment. They had no safety net, no family support system, and homelessness is the expected result of the kind of institutional racism people are now starting to resist. What's inherent in these disparities, said Valencia Adams Keelam, however you say his name, who is on the front lines of the fight against homelessness as president of the St. Joseph Center, is that rather than arrest kids, let's educate them and let's employ them, because we know what happens when they're educated and housed and working. All right. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. But yeah, family, California has California should never point its finger at nobody. Absolutely nobody. I mean, this is a total, complete, total disgrace on how this state treats its black citizens. It's a disgrace. It's embarrassing. But yet, Like I said, they love to point at, love to try to turn their nose up at the South, but your racism is worse than the South. I mean, much worse. You know. I mean, it makes no sense. Makes no sense.
In July, we brought you a story about poverty in Alabama, which was spurred by a report from the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, Philip Alston. In July, we brought you a story about poverty in Alabama, which was spurred by a report from the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, Philip Alston. Alston toured America, spotlighting third world-style poverty in our first world country. NewsHour Weekend Special Correspondent Simon Ostrowski continues following in Alston's footsteps with a report on poverty in Los Angeles. Supported in part by a grant from the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, this report is part of our ongoing series about poverty and opportunity in America, Chasing the Dream.
Los Angeles, the home of some of the most desirable zip codes in the country. But right at the heart of this wealthy metropolis exist conditions that have been described by the city's own newspaper, the Los Angeles Times, as a national disgrace. One expanse of 50 city blocks is an area that's become synonymous with poverty, crime, and homelessness. It's existed for decades and has dogged successive mayoral administrations that have tried to eradicate it. It's called Skid Row, and is home to an estimated 2,000 members of Los Angeles County's homeless community.
LA has one of the highest rents in the nation. And the reason why there's so many tents out here is because people can't afford to live in a house.
Steve Richardson, who goes by the name General Dogon, is an active.
And let's not forget, bro, housing discrimination is another big one in LA that black people have to deal with. That housing discrimination is man, like, I mean, what can you do when nobody want to rent to you? When you can't even get somebody to rent apartments to you or sell a house to you. It's crazy. But yeah, he's right. The cost of living out here is also the problem. Absolutely. That's why a lot of us are leaving out.
Activist at the LA Community Action Network, which advocates for the city's homeless community.
The majority of the people that you see sleeping on the streets are black, and these are folks that have fell through the poverty level. It makes me really mad.
Along the subject of local and national concern, Skid Row recently garnered international attention when it became the focus of a report written by the United Nations Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty, Philip Alston, whose job more often involves assessing conditions in the developing world.
The homelessness on the streets in LA is pretty staggering in terms of magnitude, in terms of how long running it is. There is a chronic shortage of affordable housing.
Nationally, homelessness has been mostly on the decline since 2010, though it ticked upward slightly in 2017 to nearly 554,000 people without their own roof over their heads in a so-called point-in-time count. The Los Angeles area, meanwhile, has trended in the opposite direction, as the cost of living here soared over the last decade, forcing thousands onto the street in what has amounted to a nearly 50% increase in homelessness since 2012 to almost 53,000 people. The sheer size of Skid Row makes it look like a refugee camp. But according to a 2017 report by several homelessness advocacy groups, the availability of toilets here is worse than in a UN-run Syrian refugee camp.
It smells of urine everywhere. Skid Row had about 10 toilets, I think, for thousands of people. So it's a pretty bad setup.
So this is, call it the Big Green Machine, and it's a bathroom.
According to the LA Community Action Network, nearly 1,800 unsheltered people in Skid Row share access to just 9 toilets like this one, which means many avoid them altogether and use buckets, which are then emptied into the streets and trash cans.
And that was PTSD, but I didn't know nothing about that.
Willie Van Seals is a Vietnam vet suffering from heroin addiction. one of almost 3,900 homeless veterans in LA County.
I'll show you. The buckets that we use are urinate, bowel movement. There's nowhere around here to use the bathroom. And that's hard on a person. You know what I mean? Especially you gotta walk around and find somewhere to take a crap. Come on now.
The authorities know hygiene is an issue here. The county health department reported that its teams observed feces and urine on 8 of 10 sidewalks during a survey back in 2012. Street washes like this one have been instituted to help stop the spread of disease.
If we don't power wash the streets, we end up with what we had years ago when we had a tuberculosis outbreak or hepatitis outbreak or some kind of disease. It has to be done. It has to be done.
Officer Dion Joseph has been patrolling the streets of Skid Row for close to 2 decades. He says he's seen well-meaning policies to improve health conditions backfire.
Years ago, we had 27 porta potties in Skid Row. My concern was that they would be taken over by the criminal element. And day one, that's exactly what happened. When those
Yeah, I remember seeing that brother somewhere, but he's been around the Skid Row area for like long time. And I heard a lot of the people down there like him. I heard he's a good dude.
bathrooms were here, gangsters were charging the homeless $1 to $5 to use the porta potties for what they were designed for.
While we're with him, Officer Joseph receives a complaint.
I've got these people who've pulled up in front of the doorway. I've asked them repeatedly to move, and trying to have a rational conversation with the irrational people, I just don't want to do it.
How are you? I'm sorry to bother you. There's a gentleman here who has a business, and the law says you can't be within 10 feet of his doorway. Can you guys move about 10 feet this way so we can have his space?
He resolves the situation without incident. But the UN report points to data from the LA Times showing that 14,000 homeless people were arrested in LA in 2016, a 31% increase since 2011. The report encouraged authorities to shift from a criminal justice response to a human rights-centered response to homelessness.
Homelessness is being criminalized in many ways, and it's as though you sort of keep moving the pieces around the chessboard and suddenly it's going to improve, instead of saying, okay, we actually need to work out how to create places where these people can go.
I agree with the UN. We shouldn't be the tip of the spear. Fix the system, especially in places like Skid Row, where many individuals struggle with dual diagnosis, where they're addicts and mentally ill. We don't want to be the tip of the spear, but we have to be until a solutions arise.
According to Victor Hinderleiter of the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, mental health and addiction are a huge factor contributing to homelessness.
Approximately 30% of people experiencing...
Yeah, family. So you see, California. It just, I don't mean to laugh, man, but it's just the way they, I remember growing up in California, man. California had a thriving, strong, black, it had a strong black middle class. You know, I can speak on that because I come from a black middle class family, and I lived in black middle class community, black middle class neighborhood. Fast forward to today, all of that is basically gone, man. I mean, there are no strong black middle class neighborhoods and communities in California anymore. Once California became liberal, once it became a blue state, Democrat, and I'm not saying the Republicans are. I'm not saying they angels. That's not what I'm saying, because I don't roll with neither party. But let's keep it a buck, you know. The Democrats, and you know, once it became blue, it's done a job. Done a huge job on the black communities in Los Angeles and forced a lot of black people out, pushed a lot of black people out. You know, historical areas such as South Central LA, Compton, which is mainly Hispanic now, which used to be African American, used to be black American. All of that is now changed. All of it looks like pretty much like Mexico now, most of it. So I point this out to mainly outsiders, just to let them know that yeah, man, the racism out here is bad. You go to all of the construction sites. I remember back in the 70s and 80s as a kid, you know, black people had those jobs, like, you know, the carpentry jobs, the electrical jobs, the plumbing jobs. All of those jobs were operated by black people, black men in particular. Now, you don't see black people on none of those sites. Nowhere to be found. You go to a construction site, you would see not one black face. You may see a token, and believe me, he'd be walking the line, walking a tight rope. But the jobs that black men used to fill, black men are no longer in those jobs anymore. They're given to illegal immigrants, undocumented workers, Hispanics. Come on, man, y'all know what I'm talking about. If you black and from California, and you grew up in the 70s and 80s, trust and believe, you know exactly where I'm coming from. But it's crazy. It's crazy how California wants to just turn its nose up at everybody else when, you know, clearly there's anti-blackism in California that needs to be called out. Needs to be called out. We don't need to be hearing no black and brown or people of color. Nah. Call out the anti-blackness that's going on right now in California. And I'm talking to these so-called black leaders, which are detrimental, if you ask me. But anyway, family, just thought I'd share this article with you. Much love. Let me know what you think. California ain't what it all claims to be. Well, I think everybody knows that now. That's why everybody's getting the hell up out of here. But let me know what you think, family. All right. One love. Peace.